All right, well, welcome everybody to our free GRE prep hour. I'm Dmitry Farber, stepping in for my colleague Kat Powell today to talk about sentence equivalence. So some of you have let me know what programs you're preparing for. I'm seeing a pretty broad range of programs. And that obviously affects what you need, how important quant is, what kind of score you want, all that. But we're all working toward that same goal of just doing well in the GRE. How many of you have already done an extensive GRE prep? Like, have you type in if you've taken like a course or worked through an entire set of materials, ours or someone else? Has anyone done that yet? Took the test. There we go. That's a form of preparation. Still didn't get a sandwich. Worked through the books. Okay. Never. So some of you are pretty new to all this. Okay, we've got a mix. Okay. So we're going to do sentence equivalence today. Tell me, has anyone never done sentence equivalence before? Tell me, just say me if you've never done a sentence equivalence problem. You're filling in two words into a blank, basically. Anyone never done one? Anyone that new? Or not that new? Okay. Oh, never. Okay, yeah. So you took a diagnostic exercise week, they're on there. Okay, so that's what we're dealing with today. We're dealing with sentence equivalence. So let's make sure we know what the task is, and we're going to work on some strategies to get more comfortable with it. A lot of people think of the GRE verbal as being all about vocabulary, and vocabulary is certainly important. If you don't know any of the words we're seeing, that's going to be a problem, right? If I took the GRE and Chinese or Portuguese or something like that, that would be a problem for me if I didn't know any of those words, right? But it's not just about vocabulary. There's a lot about comprehension, and there's a lot you can do given the vocabulary you have at any moment. There's always a lot you can do to do better with that material. Okay. We're going to do some problems today that were pulled from our 5-pound book of practice problems. If you have ever seen this book, it is literally 5 pounds. It's a monster. And the idea is that the GRE has put out its own official guide of problems, but it doesn't have a lot of material. And so to fill sort of a market niche, we wrote our own set of problems. We've got, thousands of problems in there. And additional ones you can access online, so you can get a feel for what's tested on this exam. Okay. So that's a resource you can get if you don't have it already. So we're going to talk about learning vocabulary a little bit. We'll see how much time we have for that. We're going to talk about the verbal section as a whole, and we're going to work on a strategy for sentence equivalence questions. I have this here. Okay, so basically what you're going to see on a GRE verbal section, you got a half-hour section, which means 20 questions. So the timing is pretty tight. You'll have either 2 or 3 sections, depending. You may know you get 2 sections of quant, 2 sections of verbal. They're adaptive. So basically, however you do on the first section, that determines whether you get a harder, a medium, or an easier second section. And those sections are weighted. The individual questions are worth the same within a section. But just pretend it's not actually how it works, but just pretend that, for instance, the easier section, the question's worth 1 point, and the medium, they're worth 1.5 points, and the harder, they're worth 2, or something like that. It's not that, I'm just making those numbers up. But the idea is that within the section, they're all worth the same, but you do better if you get a lot right on the hard one versus if you do a lot right on the easy one. But there could be some overlap. Someone who does very well on the medium section might do better than someone who does poorly on the harder section. So all you do is you try your best. There will also be one additional section of quant or verbal, and you won't know which one is experimental. You'll just know later, oh, I have 3 sections of verbal, so one of them didn't count. So that's what your section looks like. So you're averaging 1 minute and 30 seconds per question between text completion, sentence equivalence, and reading comprehension. Some of the text completion, especially the ones that have just one blank, will be pretty fast. You might do them in less than 1 minute. Sentence equivalence, you might easily take 1 minute or a little more per question because you have to fit 2 words into the blank. So the basic definition of this task that you're going to see 4 of per section, so 8 to 12 of per test, depending on where your experimental is you're filling in a word that goes in the blank and another word that goes in the blank in the same way. And that's really important because I could fill in a blank with 2 different words. I might say something like, let me do this way. I might say I left the party because it was blank, right? And I might fill in a word like boring, or dangerous. And in theory, both of those words could fill into that sentence, right? I could leave a party because it was boring, and I could leave a party because it was dangerous, but they don't fill into the sentence in the same way. So I wouldn't be able to choose both of those together. But the sentence I've just written is not a very good one. It's not a good example of sentence equivalence for one reason. Can anyone tell me why a real GRE sentence equivalence question, even vocabulary fill-ins aside, just the initial part, wouldn't look like that? What is that sentence missing that it's supposed to have? Yeah, it should be clear what the meaning is, right? In real life, I don't need to that, right? If I say I left the party because it was boring, that's self-explanatory and no more text is needed. But if we're supposed to fill in the blank, they have to have provided us enough information. We shouldn't have to guess and say, oh, probably boring, right? Occasionally, they might do a positive negative thing, right? Where, you know, it might say something like, well, Dmitry left the party because it was so blank, you know, his cousin found, on the contrary, found it blank. And then you need words that went opposite. So maybe I found it boring and she found it stimulating, or I found it dangerous and she found it safe, or something like that, right? But for the most part, there has to be a word that makes it clear what the meaning is supposed to be. And in that way, they're kind of different from real writing. In real writing, it might seem redundant or silly to, you know, to say something like, I left the party because it was blank, not providing me anything interesting to do. Right? Well, okay, that means boring. But if I did that, why do I need to say it? If I say boring, then I know it's not interesting, right? But that's a difference between the GRE and real writing. They're not real sentences. They're sentences that are designed to be understood and filled in. So we're looking for something that fits, and we're looking for two that fit in the same way. Okay. Some differences between the two sort of fill-in formats. There's a lot that goes across these. So although we're explicitly working on sentence equivalence today, which sounds like it's the least important thing to work on, right? It's you know, 4 out of 20 questions in a section, right? So a fifth of your test. A lot of the strategies that we're using on sentence equivalence match up perfectly with what we're going to do on text completion. The basic difference is in text completion, you can have a varying number of blanks, anywhere from 1 to 3 blanks. On sentence equivalence, we're going to have one blank. Text completion only fills in 1 word in the blank. Sentence equivalence, you're always going to fill in 2. I got a question in the chat about should we ever move on if we have a lot of time remaining. Some people, it partly depends on how you're doing it. Some people have a lot of time left because they rushed, and then you want to go back through and catch some of those errors you made. Long term, you might want to work on slowing down so you don't actually have that much time at the end. Some people are just naturally fast no matter what they do, whether they score badly or whether they score well, they're just really fast. If there's not a lot you need to check, you certainly could move on. But I think the benefits of getting some review in are going to outweigh whatever benefits you get from being like 5 minutes less tired on the exam. So for the most part, I'd err on the side of using up your time. But when you're done, if that helps. Some things that these sections have in common. They both have the same basic process of reading for understanding. The basic order would be start with reading the sentence. The most difficult thing for people on this test in general, I think, in verbal, is stopping and predicting. And even when I tell people, stop and predict, don't look at the answer choices, tell me what you think, they still don't want to do it. They'll give me these fill-ins that are the exact ones from the answer choices. I'm like, well, either you're really good at this or you looked at the answer choices, right? So really, really don't look at the answer choices right away. Eventually they'll be there. You know, it is a multiple choice test and we want to take advantage of that, but it's going to take advantage of us if we're not careful. If we go into the answer choices too soon, we're going to get tricked, and it's designed to trick you. So trust me, even if it doesn't seem like it's efficient, trust me, everyone's going to tell you the same thing. Anyone who knows much about the GRE is going to tell you the same thing. Don't be too quick to look at the answer choices. That's uncontroversial advice, except to a lot of people who don't want to believe it. So predict as well as you can. You may not be able to predict perfectly, right? But predict as well as you can. And the same goes for reading comp too. Then look at the answer choices and then double check, make sure that the answer choices you have work. Some cases you'll predict the exact answer. You'll be like, oh, I want something that says magnanimous. Oh, that's the word. Look at that. Amazing. Other times you'll say, oh, there's nothing that meant like magnanimous or generous, but there's something else that I hadn't thought of that also works. Let me just make sure it fits. Right? The kinds of traps you'll see are the same, right? They'll have things that go the opposite way. Sometimes they're testing directionality. You have to say, oh, although the party appeared this way, it was actually this, and what am I trying to contrast? And in both cases, it's all or nothing, right? So on a text completion with 3 blanks, if you get the first 2 blanks right and you get the third one wrong, you get the whole problem wrong. On a reading comp where there's like 3 statements and it's like yes or no, are these supported? If you miss the first one, then you miss the whole thing. And so same thing with sentence equivalence. If you choose one of the right words but not the other, you get not half a point, you get 0 points, unfortunately. So we want to make sure we're being thorough, but we also don't want to get stuck too long on one problem if it's not working out. If I have no idea about one part of it, I don't want to get too hung up on the rest. But we're going to see ways that you can narrow it down even when we don't know the words, and that's a useful thing to be able to do. So let's try a problem. I'm going to put one up, and I want you to try the whole process. Some of you are new to the process, some of you are not, but the whole process is going to be start with this, just reading the sentence. And what I'd like you to do is when you feel like you have a sense of what might go in that blank, private message me. So where it says in the chat, all panelists, change that to just me. And please do change it back later so we can have a nice lively discussion again. So change it to just me. And when you're ready, no hurry, go ahead and put in what you think would be a good fill-in for that blank. All right, give it a try. Let's do that in a private chat just to me for now, just so everyone has a chance to think of their own words. All right, I'm seeing a range of answers. I suppose you're right. Some of these forms, we don't have the separation between panelists and attendees. So I think if people wrote to all panelists, that just went to me, right? You guys aren't seeing everyone's chats, right? And again, sorry for my newbie questions. This is a brand new format. I've only taught it a couple times. Okay, cool. So you guys can go back to talking to all panelists and attendees now if you like. That's right. I feel so special. I'm like one of those people at Comic-Con, right? There we go. Okay, so I saw a range of interesting answers. I'm seeing resilience, archaeology, survival of the fittest, homogeneity, genealogy, evolution, immunology, human genetics. It seems a little bit wide open, right? We know some things that it has to do with people's survival. It has to do with something we're studying scientifically. A number of citizens, right? What's our clue? How do we have an idea of what we're looking at? So you saw that people are surviving the Black Death. Oh yeah, they're descending from less than 1,000, from less than 300,000 people. So or sorry, descend for less than 1,000. These are 300,000. So we're seeing a situation where a small group of people produced a large group of people. And so we can study how that works out. A sort of a safe prediction would be something about genetics. But there may be, we can imagine there's going to be some kind of quantitative element to it, in that there's something about how small the group was that produced this current crop, right? So we might not be too surprised. So all your predictions, might work, and then we have to look and see what we see in the choices. Okay. So remember that when you see the choices, two things. One, you have to choose two. And the other is that those two have to go into the sentence in similar ways. So you can't pick two different things like genetics and survival. They have to be two things that mean roughly the same thing. You could argue that no two words truly are the same because they have different connotations or different varieties of usage, but basically two equivalent words to go into that blank. So I'm going to give you the vocab now. And go ahead and go back to all panelists and tell me your answer choices when you have them. So just chat into all panelists when you have two. Remember to pick two. Don't just give me one. And you don't have to type the words if you want. You can definitely type the letters. Save yourself trouble. Wouldn't want to give anyone carpal tunnel. Someone's saying it's interesting that you can get a lot of clues from the answers. Sure. Now, should we then look at the answers? Nope. Right? Not right away. But it's a good idea. And now I'm noticing that mostly people are bunching up their answers. I'm seeing two major pairings. I'm seeing people who are choosing diversity and mutation. And I'm seeing people who are choosing revivification and rejuvenation. Let me do a different color. Revivification, rejuvenation. And those do together. If you weren't sure, to revivify, vivacious, vivarium, vital, vitality, having to do with life. Revive, I guess it's a simpler one, revivification, revive, is bringing back to life, bringing back to health. You revivified the plant by giving it food and water, that kind of thing. Rejuvenation, as you probably know, is making more young again, right? Whether it's artificially, getting your wrinkles pulled back, or actually becoming younger and healthier. Careful with C and D, those don't have pairs. Those don't have pairs. And what I mean by that is there's nothing else that means quite the same thing as therapy in this set, so it can't be right. And there's nothing else that means the same thing as history, so that can't be right. Because they have to be paired, it's got to be BNF or A&E, because those are the only words that go together. So part of the challenge, of course, is knowing that those words go together, knowing your vocabulary enough. And then it's a matter of saying, well, which one of those pairs makes sense? Am I saying that we're using this sample of people to study the way that genes mutate and diversify over time? Or are we using this to study how people become younger and healthier, right? So how do we decide that, right? Neither of those is quite what we predicted. Some people got closer. By the way, I would be careful about checking the dictionary. I would do that at the end. I would do that at the end of a problem. In other words, have your Google ready or your dictionary ready to do that, but never look up a word in the middle of a problem. Always do it at the end, because you want to practice what's going to happen on the test. And what's going to happen on the test, you're going to be faced with words you don't know. And although obviously you want to learn the words, it never ends. There's always another word that you might not know, right? There's no one in the world who knows every word in the English language. Thankfully, the GRE doesn't pull from every word in the English language. They're not going to use the word Zumburuk, which means a cannon designed to be fired from the back of a camel, They're probably not going to use the word coprolite, which means fossilized fecal matter, right? They're not likely to use those words, right? So there's certain predictable words that we show you a lot of, and we talk about having you study in our course. Exactly. So some of the words you'll never have seen before, but that's why I'm saying don't look them up yet. Look them up at the end, because you want to practice saying, how can I deal with this even not knowing all the words? That's one of the most important things you can do. So if you get nothing else from this workshop, but don't look them up until after the problem, then I hope you benefit from it. Cool. Okay. So, but in this case, I've told you what the relevant words mean. Right? So now it's a question of how we decide. How do I choose between A and E and B and F? I've seen people's opinions and we're split. Some people like A and E and some people like B and F. But how do I choose? What would you use to support one of those versus the other? All right, so the fact that we're dealing with geneticists is useful, right? Rather than say, doctors who are trying to develop therapies. Careful though, Helena, it's not just one answer, it's always two. It's always two. They survived the Black Death. Okay, so what does that tell us? 1,000 who made 300,000, right? Yeah, so it's interesting. It's a matter of looking at how things change over time, right? So imagine you've got this very small population of 1,000 people. But well, it's not just that the genes change to survive. Their genes were certainly different than others. The other people who survived, but all of them survived. We don't necessarily know like that they're being exposed to the Black Death now. What's tricky is that, okay, so you have this very small group, and they have kids and they have kids and they have kids, and they expand to this larger group. But you can look and say, wow, let's look at the very small gene pool that existed back then, whatever that was, 500 plus years ago. And let's look at where we are now and look at all the changes in their genes. So you're studying a small group and you can learn a lot about their genes. Now, we don't have to be science or history experts to do this. The other thing is that rejuvenation and revivification have to do with making people younger and healthier, right? And we don't know that the fact that people survived the Black Death means that we know how to make anyone younger or healthier. So B and F are what you might say too speculative. In other words, they're going in and saying, oh, maybe because they survived the Black Death, we can learn about making people younger and healthier. Whereas what we know is that they came from a group that was not very diverse. It was a very small group, and they've grown over time. And so we can see how genes diversify and mutate. Okay. Does that make sense to everybody? Anyone have questions about that? Are speculative answers a common wrong type of answer? Absolutely. Yes, they are. Speculative answers are ones where basically you go, I could see how that would make sense, but I don't really have any proof. Right? Now, you could argue, if you didn't like A and E, you could argue, well, hey, mutations is a speculation. I don't know if they're studying how the genes mutate or if they're studying what makes a survivor different from someone else, right? Maybe they're looking at the fact that maybe if you compare people in Iceland who all survived the Black Death to people in Japan who were never exposed to the Black Death, and so maybe some of them would survive it and some of them wouldn't, depending on if they were looking, and we're comparing that. We don't know 100% for sure, but if we look at what we have a small group producing a large group. That's a suitable place to study diversity and mutation. We don't know anything about making people younger and healthier. Okay, any questions on that one? So notice one thing we can do to make our lives a little easier is group the answer choices. If I recognize that therapy and history don't have pairs, that makes it a step easier. And then if I know that these words go together, now I've gone from a very small chance of guessing right to 50-50. Right? Because if I just guess randomly, right? If I just guess randomly, well, I've got a problem because there's, a pretty wide array of choices that I could come up with if I say, okay, I could do A and B or A and C or A and D or A and E or A and F or B and C or B and D or B, all these things. And now I'm down to a 50-50. That makes my job a lot easier. How would you rank this difficulty-wise? It's a hard one. It's a hard one. because it is conceptually a little bit annoying. The words are in the middle. They're not the hardest words you'll see. They're words that a lot of people find familiar. And the right answers are words that most people know. Diversity and mutation are words that most people know. But it is hard conceptually, and that would make it a little higher. We don't have a specific ranking for it, but I would say it's on the hard end. Okay, anything else on this one? Oh, glad to help. So as far as working the back end of things, remember that we're looking for a pair. And so that's really important on sentence equivalence, is to recognize that we're looking for a pair and that the words have to work together as a pair. And that really helps us narrow down our answers. We can say, oh, I know the answer is not history because it doesn't fit anything else that they say, right? I might try some sort of false triple with revivification, therapy, and rejuvenation. Those are really close together. But therapy doesn't really mean revivification or rejuvenation. There are lots of meanings of therapy. And so without attaching one of those words to it, I wouldn't match it to those others. So we're looking for a pair. And so one thing that's really useful is to find the words that pair up. So let's try a little exercise. Some of you may have seen this before if you took our course, but even then you might not have. Look for words that go together in pairs. Here you can talk to the whole group. You don't have to be private. Tell me if you see words that match, and I'm going to sneeze. Thank heavens for the mute button. Lull and hiatus. Yes, right? So if there's a lull in activity, it's on hiatus. That means the same thing, that they're on break for a while, right? Okay, so those go together. Acme and epitome. Yeah, watch out for the trap answer. Nadir is the opposite of acme. And acme is a high point, and nadir is a low point. Maggie, what did you say oops about? Did you mistake one? So yeah, resolution is different, right? Resolution is when you solve something, you wrap something up in some way, right? Epitome is like the utmost, the ultimate. Sometimes epitome gets used as an expression, right? Like let's say you go on a really bad date and you said that was the epitome of the bad first date. You don't just mean it was really bad, you mean it's like the ultimate example of one. Oh, the person was selfish and only talked about themselves, and it was really rude and was overly familiar. We were just getting to know each other, and wanted to split the check 50-50, but kept ordering really expensive things that I then had to pay for, and blah 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 blah. Right? It was just, you didn't like that person at all, right? That's one way we use epitome. But it can also just mean the top, the uppermost, right? Which goes along with that. So nadir and resolution don't actually have matches, right? Okay. Good. Let's try another set. Where do we see some matches here? Okay, taciturn and reticent. Not everyone maybe knows those. What do those mean? Uh-huh. You're quiet, you're reluctant, you don't want to say a lot. Yeah, those go together. Okay. What else? Convivial and gregarious. Right? Those are, chatty, talkative, friendly, right? But now loquacious and garrulous are related to those too, but they have a slightly different meaning. So I would argue that we could do it this way. Gregarious and convivial go together, and then separately, garrulous and loquacious go together. So garrulous and loquacious means you want to talk a lot, la, 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 la. Whereas gregarious and convivial have to do with more being friendly and sociable. So they're more personality traits about your preferences and how you act. Garrulous and loquacious are specifically about a lot of talking. Okay. And you might have someone who's very garrulous, but they're not friendly or welcoming. They just do all the talking. Okay, one more set. Okay, enervate, droop, enervate, flag, droop. Those all seem to go together. Those are interesting. So we've got an interesting potential triple here to talk about. So enervate, flag, and droop all seem connected. Let's come back to those in a minute. Indict and stymie, what do those have to do with each other? We know vivify is going to be like revivify. It's put life into something. We don't have anything that means that. In fact, it seems to go against all the ones that we just paired. So vivify has no pair. Indict and stymie, if you're following the news, I could see you putting those together right now. But what does stymie mean? To stall, to prevent. Sometimes it's to sort of frustrate in a sense, like you hold something. It stymied my attempts to do this, right? I don't think that means quite the same as indict. What does indict mean? Mm-hmm. It can literally mean you called someone up in court and accused them, right? It can mean that you just think they're a bad person. Like you'll read a piece that's a stirring indictment, right, of somebody, right? You're going off on that person. So those things are both negative verbs, but they're not the same kind. So those don't really have pairs either. So we have this triple, but we can't have a triple, right? If we really had a triple, we'd be in trouble because there's only two that can be right. So in fact, if the three were really all the same, we'd know they were all wrong, right? Because how would I pick just two? So there must be some difference. Now, enervate, flag, and droop all convey the idea of losing energy, right? Enervate sounds like it should go with vivify. Like if you didn't know the word enervate, you might be forgiven for thinking it means fill with energy. And one of the annoying things about trying to get vocabulary down is that using the relationships between words, even like things like Latin and Greek roots, all that kind of stuff, it works best for remembering what you already know. It's not so good for learning stuff you don't know. Think about the interesting relationship between these words. Right? Think about these words, overlook, oversee, and oversight. If I overlook something, means I don't notice it usually. And if I oversee something, means I supervise it. So I am hopefully noticing it. Whereas if I make an oversight, I am not noticing it again. But if something's under my oversight, that means I'm overseeing it. And if my house overlooks the ocean, then I do get to see the ocean. So it's really confusing with these words, even though we know the words look and see and sight and over. It's really hard to predict sometimes what some of these things are. Or what about the word invaluable, which seems like it means not valuable, so like cheap, but really means you can't place a value on it. So it means it's infinitely valuable. Right? So if you say your parents' love is invaluable, it doesn't mean it's worthless. It means you can't place a value on it because it's so important, right? So it's again, these kind of roots are better for remembering why something is true rather than actually learning it, unfortunately. So flag has a couple meanings, right? You can flag something for attention, right? So I mean, obviously there's flag like the American flag, right? But as a verb, and these are all verbs, generally speaking, they'll all be the same part of speech. So if you see a word like flag or milk that you think of as a noun, you think, oh, they mean it as a verb, to flag something, or to milk the topic for all it was worth, or something like that, right? So flag can mean to tag something for attention, right? The way you flag a page in your book, or you flag an error in a tax return or something like that. But flag can also mean my energy flagged. I ran out of energy, right? And that sounds a lot like enervate and droop. So there's another way we have to think about verbs, and it has to do with how you use them in a sentence, right? So let's use droop first, because I think that's probably the most straightforward one. How would I use droop in a sentence? If I think of it relating to the other as having to do with losing energy, give me a sentence with droop in it. And you can do it to the whole room. All right, the flowers droop without water. The flowers seem to droop. Okay. Yep. So the flowers are doing something. They are losing energy. They are dripping, right? Dropping, drooping, losing out, right? Now, if you're going to fill in another word there, would you be more likely to use flag or enervate? We're tied. Oh, flag picks up a supporter. Oh, we're kind of split here. All right, well, I'll just tell you. There's a difference between these two words, and it's a subtle one, but it's an important one. Enervate is something you do to someone or something else, or something does to you. You don't enervate. I can't say, oh, I enervated by the end of the test. The flowers enervated without water. Something enervates you. So if I say, oh, long work meetings enervate me, right? It means, oh, when I am in a long work meeting, I lose energy, but the meeting enervates me. It's what you call a transitive verb. It's one that takes an object. Whereas a verb like flag or droop is an intransitive verb. It means you just do it. The flower is flagged, the flower is drooped. So flag and droop actually are the ones that match here. Does everyone see what I mean about that? That basically we need words that describe something that, well, what these both do is they describe something that a person or a thing can do when it loses energy, whereas enervate is to make someone else or something else lose energy, and there's no match for that. I can't say, I flagged the flowers, right? The test flagged me. The test drooped me. I can say the test enervated me, or my energy flags, or I droop during the test. Does that make sense? So we've got a false triple here, and so we got to watch for that, right? And this is a fairly common pattern, right? We'll see things like this. Hey, these words all kind of go together. Curt, succinct, brusque. Okay? They all basically mean short. Which one of them doesn't match? Which one of them doesn't fit the rest? Succinct. Okay, why? What's different about succinct? Excellent. Yeah. It's concise. It's generally positive, right? Oh, she gave a succinct presentation, right? I suppose I could say it was overly succinct, right? I was wanting more, I thought this free prep hour was going to be a free prep day. I was kind of bummed it was only an hour. It was too succinct, right? Um, but but generally it doesn't have a negative connotation. If anything, it's more of a positive one, whereas curt and brusque imply negatively or rudely so, right? If you asked me a question and I gave a curt answer, it would imply that maybe I was a little impatient or rude with you, right? And maybe unnecessarily so, right? Hopefully nothing that you could do would cause me to be necessarily rude. That would be terrible. So there's a different slant on that, and that makes curt and brusque more likely to be the pair that goes together. Okay. So this gives us options. The standard way to do SE is through analysis. Read the sentence first, predict what goes in the blank, go and look at the choices, right? But we can do some back-end work and work upwards by looking at the answer choices. If we're stuck, we can do this. If we're in situations where we don't feel great about what fills in, or if we're trying to figure out what to use, and and we're like, we think we know what kind of goes in the blank, but we're not quite sure what kind of word we're looking for. Sometimes we're even just looking to see if there's like one word or two. Sometimes people go, oh, it's a two-word fill-in, right? It's like inoculated against, inured to, right? Oh, there's two words in there. Sometimes looking, just glancing helps us with that, right? So we're going to use this when the sentence looks really tough to deal with. We're going to use it when we're familiar with the words. If we're not familiar with the words, it's harder to use. Some people would say we should always use it. I certainly might use it at the end, right, to use that kind of thinking. But initially, I'm going to use it because I'm stuck on the sentence. Right. Okay. Let's lead into another full problem. But I'm going to play find the pairs with you one more time, and then we'll go into the. So we're basically going to work backwards. Then we'll go into the question. So what are the pairs here? Crushed and disappointed, right? Notice that crushed is a little stronger than disappointed, right? I might be disappointed that my favorite ice cream flavor was discontinued, but I might not be crushed unless it was like, I've been serving overseas for 3 years and all I want is to go home and have my favorite ice cream with my wife. And not only did she leave me, but the ice cream's gone, you know what I mean, right? I could be crushed, right? But they still have the same basic connotation, which is you're sad that it's the case, okay? We have a trick pair here. So I see some differences. I'm seeing BD and AB. So flabbergasted means what? What does flabbergasted actually mean? It's kind of a fun word. Totally surprised, right? Do we know if I'm flabbergasted? When I'm flabbergasted, do we know if I'm flabbergasted in a good way or a bad way? A lot of people think of it as negative, but it's not necessarily the case, right? You know, maybe I play tennis against Serena Williams and I win. That would literally just never happen. I can't imagine a circumstance in which that could happen unless she were literally not standing, right? And even if she were lying down, probably okay. So, but let's just say she and I would probably both be flabbergasted in different ways, right? She'd be like, "This dude, really?" Right? He doesn't even know how to hold his racket, and I'd be flabbergasted, like, "Huh, that's weird." Oh, yeah, shook. Okay, yeah. All right. Okay, so it's not necessarily negative. And for that reason, it goes better with bedazzled than with aggravated, but there's another reason it doesn't go with aggravated. I'll come back to it in a second. But one reason is it's not necessarily negative. Bedazzled sounds like these days, I think we use it to describe, you use some little TV infomercial tool to put jewels on your pants. We're not talking about that, right? Bored doesn't match at all. But also aggravated doesn't mean what most folks think it means. My mother-in-law always uses aggravated to mean like you're bothering me, quit aggravating me, right? She doesn't say it to me. I'm of course a delight to be around at all times, but that's not actually what aggravated means. That's irritate. Aggravate means to make something worse, right? So aggravated in this case would mean made worse. Like I could say something like, my headache was aggravated by the loud music. It doesn't mean my headache was annoyed. It means that the loud music actually made my headache even more severe. The student already thought I was stupid, and it was aggravated by the fact that I missed the very first question they asked me about, right? Something like that. Okay. Hate when that happens. Okay, so that would be out as well. So aggravated and bored don't have matches. So even without having seen the sentence, we know that it's either flabbergasted and bedazzled or crushed and disappointed. What I hope you're getting out of this is that a fair amount of the time, if you know the words, you can get down to a 50-50 instead of, feeling like you have all these things to choose from. Okay, with a little bit of analysis, and it's worth doing some of the analysis for sure. Now, let's go in and see which of those fits this sentence we're going to see. Do we want something that means, whoops, clear. Do we want something that means amazed? Possibly positively, not necessarily, right? Or, hey, disappointed, let down. Okay? Take a minute to take a look at this and see if you like A or B. Okay, yeah, amazed, right? I suppose the government officials could be like, we told you to map. We didn't ask you to collect a wealth of information on a myriad of topics, right? What am I supposed to do with this? This is going to overflood our hard drives. No. Yeah, some people probably are amazed by, are mad about that. Depends on what the government project is supposed to be doing, right? And what it is. But for the most part, they're amazed. Hey, you actually got all this cool stuff, right? It would be another thing if they totally went off task and did something they weren't supposed to do, right? But just getting more information sounds positive. And so we don't want the negative word. And so then we can go in and be like, oh, well then, it sounds like flabbergasted and bedazzled. Funny as those words might seem in this context, have to be right. Remember, we're always picking two. So if you're coming in saying D, careful, it's B and D. Has to be two. Has to be two. Yeah, cool. All right, so that's the idea. So, you know, we can use this anytime we want. We could use this up front if we want before we do the analysis. It doesn't mean we shouldn't then do the analysis and try to fill out our own words. And there is the danger that we're going to get excited by our word pair and fit it when it doesn't really fit. So there's still something to be said for looking at the sentence first, but you know, you'll find your style. Right? All right. So one place where we might use it, you look at something like this and you go, wow. By framing the new law as a question of urgency or safety rather than of privacy, the government obviated the need to pass through the standard channels of legislation, effectively blank all formal assent and relegating any would-be naysayer for a position of gate actor without right. That's pretty heavy. But I could look at the answer choices and say, all right, can I narrow this down? See if you can find some pairs again. All right, I'm seeing people say A and B go together. Yeah, curtailing and undermining, both negative, right? So those go together in the sense of they're slightly different, right? They're slightly different. I might not say those mean the exact same thing, but curtailing is to cut short, to rein in. To undermine is to undo, to detract from, right? You might say I'm targeting someone and undermining them, but those don't necessarily go together. Lobbying and instigating, notice kind of like flag and droop, those are words that don't quite go together because I might lobby for a change, but I would instigate a change. So they get used slightly differently, right? I lobby for an industry or I lobby for a law versus I instigate an actual change. So the way they get used is a little different. Targeting and facilitating, that's a tough one. They might go together. You can target you know, a specific action and you can facilitate that action, but they don't really quite mean the same thing. So we don't really have a lot of pairs, and that makes our job easier, doesn't it? It seems pretty likely that those things work. Now let's see if they make sense when we go into the question, right? It's a little overwhelming, so I might want to zoom in on the part that that is near the blank. The government obviated the need to pass through the standard channels, whatever that means. You might not feel like you know what that means. It effectively blank all formal dissent and relegating any would-be naysayer to being powerless. And the reason I'm getting rid of some language is I'm trying to cut some of the difficulty out and say, okay, so the government got rid of something, they blank something to dissent, and they turn naysayers into powerless bystanders. So we can sort of see this is negative, right? They did something bad to the dissent, right? What word would you have fit in? I wouldn't have chosen any of these 6 words, honestly. What word would you have put in? Effectively blank all formal dissent. Give me like a really easy, simple word, not a fancy word, not a GRE vocabulary word. Circumvent, okay. But aside from the answer choices, give me one from your own vocabulary. Give me an easy one. Give me one that a 5th grader would know. Blocked or blocking, effectively blocking, quashing, stopping, destroying, cutting. Yeah, getting rid of, right? Something that means it's not there, right? Partly that comes from our fancy vocabulary. If you know that obviate means to make unnecessary or to remove, we no longer have the need for this. And notice they're talking about for themselves. The government obviated the need to pass through the standard channels. In other words, I'm saying I can pass laws without having to like get them okayed by anybody or have them reviewed. And that stops the kind of dissent that we would normally have. So it's a positive thing for the government maybe, and it's a bad thing for other people who want to stop them, right? So you know, I could just use a simple word like stopping or getting rid of, and then curtailing and undermining are the closest thing we have to that. How are we feeling about that? Does that make sense? So here's one where simplifying the sentence is helpful, but also working the answer choices and say, hey, there's only so many that really go together. Notice that there are a lot of ones that you could stretch and say, I could see how instigating and facilitating go together, but yeah, not really, right? And so partly it's getting stricter and stricter with that, right? And you'll find these are ones that we wrote, and we do a pretty good job, I think, but you'll find that the GRE is even more careful. That official GRE questions are going to be very careful about how words go together and do they really fit in the same way. Okay, any questions on this? All right, well, let's try to fit in 1 or 2 more. Let's do the whole process. So I'm going to give you the whole thing with the sentence and the vocabulary, and let's have you type into me. So all panelists, type into me when you have your 2 answers. But try to go through the process. Either predict an answer first or analyze the answer choices first. But try one of those things before you put an answer in. All right, here we go. All right. Seeing a few different answers. Okay, so a couple things here. So a lot of people were in the realm of B, A, and F. And then there's C in there too. So updated and enhanced both kind of go together. But the specification didn't update or enhance the project. So notice they're comparing the actual to the projected. Although it had all the capabilities that the original specification blank, the delay meant it had already been surpassed, right? So they're saying, hey, the project came out the way, and it had what it was supposed to have, but it was so late that it was already out of date, right? It would be like if I was going to make a phone that was better than the current iPhone, but it came out 10 years from now, and by then, it had to be synced with your brain and, the size of your fingernail and able to facilitate space travel. And it was, I'm just putting out the iPhone 11 basically, right? Notice that the specification has to be the one that has these things, right? So all of these kind of worked. Notice one difference is, are we saying that it had the capabilities or that it said it would have the capabilities, right? And that's an important difference. So said it would have, how do we know? So it said it would have, there was a delay. Well, I'm not sure the delay by itself tells me. So we're comparing the original to the original, description or prediction, like if we chose C, to what actually happened. So yeah, so when it was finally ready versus what they originally said. But we want to know whether, so did, one thing I could ask, did, if I had to choose between, let's say, A versus C, one says the specification had the capabilities and the other said it predicted the capabilities, which would you go with? Yeah, the specification didn't actually have the abilities, right? It didn't possess them. So then we have boasted of, predicted, and promised. And I can see getting really torn up in those three, right? Boasted sounds like bragging, right? Promise is a little more neutral. I just say I could promise something bad or something good, right? Although we are talking about capabilities, so we're promising something good in this case. Predicted says it's going to have it, right? Now, one thing that would be important at this point to narrow it down is think about what we're looking at. We're looking at an original specification that said what the product was going to have as capabilities. At that point, does it make more sense to say that I predicted it would have the capabilities or that I boasted that the capabilities would really be there? Predicted is a little neutral and it almost sounds like they're not involved, right? If I have a specification, it shouldn't be predicting what's going to happen. It should be what we say we're going to do, right? If that makes sense, in the sense of, I'm not saying, here's what I think that, like, let's say it's a phone, here's what I think, or it's software, here's what I think the software will do. We're saying that it's going to have these things. And so promised and boasted of, even though they might feel slightly different, they both convey the meaning that we're saying, yeah, be proud of us, we're going to actually be able to do this, right? Here's all the good stuff you're going to get. Yeah, they even say, I had a friend who was in real estate who complained that this word gets overused, the word boasts. The house boasts a fully upgraded kitchen, right? So it sounds funny because a house doesn't really boast, right? But it's an expression people will use to say the house, has something that it can be proud of. So the specification can boast of something, meaning, hey, look at this, we're really going to have it. Predicted is too bland and neutral, but also too much implying that we're trying to figure out what it's going to have rather than stating and specifying what it's going to have. Okay. So that's our process, right? We want to get really good at predicting up front, and then we want to get really good at pairing up the words on the back end. Notice that although there were some hard words today, including in the sentences, we didn't talk about the word chagrin, right? Basically, which means embarrassment, displeasure. There were some hard words. I think that's not where most of the difficulty came from. We spent a lot of time talking about words that we all knew. So make sure you're working on that. And I've seen sometimes an entire group of people all miss a question when they knew every single word that was there. So keep studying your vocab. That's good. But also work on the skills for working with what you have. Okay. So we are going to wrap up here. Anyone want to share any takeaways they got from today? Anything you want to do differently, or anything you learned that's useful? You're scared? Aw. You got to learn more vocab for sure. Pairing, really important, right? So pairing is a great tool. I'll say vocab is important, but not everything. Okay. Yeah. Simplifying down the sentence to focus on what impacts the blank can make your job easier. Yeah, false triples go along with pairing, right? If I'm looking and saying, hey, what words don't quite match, using little differences in shading of meaning. Flashcards, it's all about getting back and repeating. Some people use websites like Anki or Quizlet that will help you not just create the cards online, but also come back and review again. It can also be useful to what am I trying to say? To come back around at certain times, even if you're going to do physical flashcards, make stacks and move them along. In other words, you have the deck you're working on actively, and you have another deck that you're going to review at a week or more remove, and then you have the deck that you're going to review far out. And if you get them after several weeks or a month, then retire them. Then you're done. All right. So physical flashcards are good. Abdulaziz, I don't know the exact upload date. I think they get uploaded pretty promptly, but you can check back in the student service, so they don't know 100% on that one. Yeah, physical flashcards are good. Sometimes there's something to be said for actually making them and spending time making them useful to you, putting in definitions that make sense to you, using the words in context, come up with mnemonic devices, things like that. It's really powerful. All right, folks, I'm going to wrap up here. And if you haven't yet taken one of our courses and you want to check them out, here's the website for it. Any questions for me, definitely let me know. Other than that, thanks so much for coming around. Great work, everyone, and good luck with your test.